He told me to lay down on the floor. He lifted up my dress.
A predator will use this kind of ruse to keep their victim compliant.
I knew it was against what my father would have wanted. The life of my son was more important.
She's using all the lies back against him, and that's a real assertion of power.
I outsmarted my depraved and horrifically abusive father. I grew up in Paterson, New Jersey. My father is from Alabama by way of Florida. My mom was completely in love with my father. Their life, from what I remember together, seemed very happy. He had started a band at one point. She was a backup singer. And they just seemed to be like the perfect couple. I loved my father dearly. He was like the best guy I could even imagine. But at the same time, I was afraid. Out of my parents, he was the one that beat us with the belt if we did anything wrong. So there was that fear. My father was really anti the system, anti the American system, anti the government. And he chose to homeschool me and my siblings.
Whilst homeschooling is accepted as a practice, it's homeschool for a different reason. It's political, it's controlling, it's about perspectives about the outside world that are considered dangerous. And that creates a psychological mindset for a child that essentially they're being protected.
His method of teaching was to have a kung fu slipper. So if I got the answer wrong, then I got spanked with a kung fu slipper. He just became more and more strict. We were also taught to not talk to any of the other adults about details of the things that happened in our house.
Children, primary caregivers are like gods. You essentially trust them no matter what. Whatever their behavior towards you is, you accept because you have nothing to compare it with. And therefore, if they tell you that you shouldn't be talking to your extended family, you believe there must be a reason for that. That's what classic abusers do. They isolate, they create fear, and they manipulate the individuals they control to believe that their way is the only way.
One afternoon when I was about 8 years old, my father wanted to speak to me. My heart started racing because I was like, okay, what did I do wrong? What am I in trouble for? I had no idea. And when I went into the bedroom, he was standing there leaning against the base of my parents' bed. And he started praising me. He started commending me, telling me that he was very proud of me and I was his special daughter, that now it was time for him to teach me how to be a woman. He pulled me into this little space. He told me to lay down on the floor. He lifted up my dress and he pulled down my underwear. I told him that I wanted him to stop, but he continued anyway until I guess he decided he was finished, and he got up and he pulled my dress down. He told me that this was our secret. At the same time, it was what all fathers did with their daughters. Our secret, all fathers.
So you're sworn to secrecy, and yet in the same moment you're told it's normal. For a young child, it's impossible to compute. But you see, if you're a groomer and a child molester, you're going to utilize confusion to keep that child exactly where you want.
I started not getting sleep because I had to get up early in the morning, help with my siblings, but then my father would keep me awake at night performing sexual acts on me.
Services aren't noticing her because she's not at school. That means that she's imprisoned in this situation and she's powerless to make any changes.
One night, after he molested me, I decided to go and take some of his cheesecake without asking. He caught me, and the punishment was that he sodomized me. He choked me and he slapped me in my face, and he told me that the only thing I was good for was to please him sexually, and that is what God had ordained, and that's what my role in my life was.
You would say that he was definitely somebody who had the dark triad of personality disorders, which is Machiavellian, psychopathic, and narcissistic. They make you a really malevolent individual, a very dangerous person to be around, and genuinely somebody that it would be very unlikely could change.
Anything that I knew, positive or negative, came from him. That made it more difficult to really identify how wrong what was happening to me was.
It's really common. It's a sad reality, and it's why so many children are left in diabolical situations.
He moved us one night to this house in a one room that had mattresses and a carpet on the floor in the basement. That's where we lived. Me, my siblings, my mom, and my dad. I realized that I could not leave them with him because I didn't want them to be hurt like I was hurt. So for a lot of my teenage years, I accepted, my role in the family, and that was to do what it was that I needed to do to keep him happy and satisfied sexually. When I had my daughter, he then announced that it was ordained by God and he was chosen to repopulate the earth. He intentionally would look to get me pregnant and keep me pregnant as often as possible. During this period, he met the Fugees. He convinced them that he would basically shoot them to the top of the charts using new visual ideas. Now his family became a production company. My father got the opportunity to produce and direct his most well-known work, which is Killing Me Softly by the Fugees. It distracted my father, and it seemed to keep him pretty happy. There was less violence, there was less beatings, there was less threats.
But it'll only ever be temporary, because the minute that a level of stress reignites the way that they are, they will not only return to that behavior, but there'll usually be an amplification in their behavior, because they will feel that whatever it was that they were putting their energy in hasn't given them essentially the domination and power that they required.
I got pregnant again, and then when he was not invited to the MTV Music Video Awards, he was very angry. And he raped me and sodomized me, and I miscarried the baby. I got pregnant again right after with my second daughter, who I had in 1997. Not only me, my brother as well. We used to spend hours just imagining what life would be like outside of my father's control, being able to have friends. And that's how I put myself to sleep at night. While I was a teenager and my father was trying to keep me quiet, one of the things he told me was that if I did not complain, he would not abuse my siblings. And I thought it was my responsibility to protect them.
In abusive situations, people would be very surprised how often a predator will use this kind of ruse to keep their victim compliant. If you don't do what I say, I'm gonna hurt somebody that you love.
He did not keep that promise. The first time I discovered that my father lied to me, I walked in on him about to perform oral sex on one of my younger sisters. I felt defeated and so sorry for my sisters. My son woke up with seizures. He was 5 months old, and my brother was visiting. He convinced my mom to bring my son to the hospital. I knew it was against what my father would have wanted, but the life of my son was more important.
What you're seeing is the absolute juxtaposition between the kind of parent that her father is versus the kind of parent that she is.
When my son was first admitted into the hospital, the forms were asking questions. I really didn't know how to fill them out, but there was something that clicked that said, just fill it out honestly and put down my father's name as my son's father.
She's using all the lies that he's told her back against him, and that's a real assertion of power.
Social services was called in. They interviewed me, they interviewed my father. During this time, he continued to threaten my life if I was to tell them anything, and the life of my sisters. But at the same time, he allowed social services to come into our home and take my other children to do a medical review of them.
Everybody around her is concerned, and that is denying the whole mindset that her father has created within her and instilled within her all these years. Suddenly the house of cards is falling.
They decided to keep the children in the hospital. A warrant was put out for the arrest of my dad, and he went on the run. I was with my children for about 10 days, but they eventually went into foster care.
For a loving mother, there is absolutely nothing more punishing than being separated from the children that you love.
In a weird way, it was also a relief because I knew that they wasn't with my father anymore. I became more focused on the possibility of escaping him. My father was on high alert with everything. Because he was in hiding, he could not do his video production work. He essentially made and as many of his adult children as possible breadwinners. My father still found a way to gain access to everybody. During this time, I got pregnant with my last daughter by him. There was one day that he went over to the house that my sisters and my mom was staying, and he decided that he was going to bring my little sister into the room with him to stay the night with her and to rape her. I absolutely lost it. Actually, you can say that I found it. That's when I realized that everything that my father had been saying was lies. And I saw him for who he really was. All of that anger came out, and you fucking asshole, you piece of shit, piece of shit, piece of shit, piece of shit. Like, I just remember feeling that so much. Like, you're really just a piece of shit. I really didn't know how he was going to respond. But when he sat down, and I was like, wow, you're really just a weak little man, all of this time taking advantage of children.
Children who are abused, their abusers always seem much stronger, much bigger, more terrifying, because they are so different in size. And because of that, the character tends to be amplified in their minds, even as they grow into teens and adults. When they suddenly have that perception shift and they realize that they're no longer a child and this person is somebody that they can take on, it's a really powerful paradigm change.
It was a huge stressor lifted off of my shoulders, because then I felt like it was easier to take the next step forward. I took my sister into the room and I locked the door behind us, and I stayed with her for the rest of the night. And by the next morning, my father was gone. It was just important to me then to educate myself on every and anything as much as possible. I learned what a pedophile was. I learned what domestic violence was. I learned what the prevalence was and how debilitating it is on its victims and its survivors. So the idea that my father was a pedophile and he would continue to rape and molest children, that set in. Our father was still free and he was having children with other women. We realized that we had to do something to stop him. And it was at that time that my sisters and I decided that we was going to report him to authorities and hopefully get him off of the streets. He was not detained until 2006. It took about a year for the authorities to find him. My father initially was charged with various sexual crimes against my sister. The next trial was to then get him convicted with the crimes that he committed against me. And that was the first time I confronted him. I told him about the impact that his choices had on his children and on my children. I told him that my daughter died, and I told him that he lost control of me a long time ago. He's now currently serving 90 years in prison. I got my children back from foster care. I went to school for the first time when I was 35 years old. My focus is to use what I've experienced and what I've learned to help others and to build businesses and build the life that my brother, who is no longer with us, and I dreamed about that we would do when we escaped my father.
When I've worked with victims who have endured the most horrific crimes, one of the things that sets apart their healing is when they create legacy. A way of taking every horrific moment they've endured, every loss they've encountered, every crime they've experienced, and turning it into something useful, something helpful for others. When you look at somebody like Aziza, she is the absolute definition of survivor, and she's a thing of great hope.